This is The Shift, Stories of Resistance and Resilience, a multi-platform conversation series produced and hosted by Mark Travis Rivera, the professional storyteller. I believe that we must embrace the power of stories to create a more inclusive world. So this series aims to share perspectives, insights, and stories from professionals around the world about the role that resistance and resilience plays in our personal and professional lives. So, tune in, listen up, take notes, and recognize our shared humanity. This is The Shift. Hello. Welcome back to The Shift. My name is Mark Travis Rivera. I am the CEO and founder of The Professional Storyteller, where I embrace the power of stories to create a more inclusive world. I do that through 5 pillars of activities: choreography, coaching, consulting, speaking, and writing. And I am the creator and host of The Shift, Stories of Resistance and Resilience, a multi-platform series aimed at having real conversations with real people across industries and experiences to talk about what it means to resist and be resilient at a time like now. And I'm excited to have today's guest. He was the first guest on my first ever podcast, Marking the Path. If you know, you know. Be sure to check that podcast out. I had hair back then. Now I don't. It's a new evolution. But I'm really excited to be with someone I deeply admire and respect. And I still can't believe I have yet to meet you in real life. But today's guest is the incomparable, the dopest person I know on Instagram. Joél Leon is the author of the 2025 Gotham Book Prize nominated Everything and Nothing at Once, a Black Man's Reimagined Soundtrack for the Future. He is a Bronx-born girl dad, poet, performer, and cultural critic who writes and tells stories for Black people. His TED Talk on co-parenting has over 1.6 million views, and his work has been featured in the New York Times, People, the Boston Globe, ABC News, TED, Ebony, OK Player, Pop Sugar, The Root, Newsweek, Forbes, and others. He's a Creative Collective, New York City Creative Club alumni, winner of the BCA Bronx Recognizes His Own Award in Poetry, member of the Top 50 Waymaker Class of 2025, and the author of Things I Will Tell My Daughter and Good God Wears Do-Rags Too by Bottle Cap Press. He is also a creative director at the New York Times T Brand Studios. His latest book, Holt McMillan Essay Collection, Everything and Nothing at Once, a Black Man's Reimagined Soundtrack for the Future, is nominated again for the 2025 Gotham Book Prize. And Folio Literacy is who reps Joél. And he's my guest today on The Shift. Welcome, Joél. Hey.
Happy to be here. Good to see
Happy
you.
to see you again, and happy to be in community and conversation with you today. You know, I kick off this conversation series with the same question I asked. There's 3 questions I ask every guest, which is, who are you outside of the professional highlights I read in your bio? Yeah, I think sometimes we rely so much on our bios, but we forget that there's a human behind the work.
Yeah, I'll be honest with you. I despise bios, Mark, so much because what it does is it can set the tone and expectation for what people want from you, or
Right.
people kind of create their own opinions and narratives about the things that they hear. And first and foremost, I'm a Black man, and I'm from the Bronx. I mean, that's it.
Down?
Like, I have to kind of say that out loud for folks. 188th and Creston Avenue, to be exact.
Uh-huh.
And I'm a father, more than anything else. I'm a father to 2 little beautiful Black girls I'm trying to raise in a hectic and tumultuous world. But those are the primaries. I'm also a son. I'm a brother. I'm a community member. I'm a community advocate. Like yourself and so many others, I'm a multitude of things.
Yes, absolutely. And you are indeed a storyteller for first and foremost. That's how I discovered you and came across your work. And so I'm really excited to be in community with you today. And I have to say, we're shifting how we do the shift, y'all.
Okay.
So we are doing shorter form content. So if it feels more truncated than the past episodes, it's because they are truncated. Because life be lifing and people don't have the attention spans of to an hour conversation. I would, because I am a dork and I love to listen to conversations and have conversations, but that's not where the world is today. And it's my job to meet people where they are. So shorter in length, but not shorter in quality or content,
Yeah, for
or the
sure.
quality of the content or the conversation. So I just want to name that for the listeners and new folks who may be tuning in for the first time because you see Joel's name and you want to tune into the shift. Joel, I have to ask you, and again, this is another question I ask every guest.
Yeah.
What is your personal concept of resistance and resilience? How do you define those terms for yourself?
Well, I think of resistance. The first thing that normally comes to mind is art, my art, but also the art of so many, of Toni Morrison, of Marie Baraka, of James Baldwin, Gil Scott Heron, and some of the more contemporaries of granted, Sonia Sanchez still alive, Nikki Giovanni, God bless the dead, but Mahogany Brown,
Mm,
Ursula Rucker, Lemon Anderson, Elizabeth Velasquez, folks who are resisting in their artwork and then
mm,
in their practice, and I think there's so many of us who are resisting, I think, on a daily basis, community organizers and strategists across the country. I think of the organizations that are helping us resist and learn the language of resistance.
yeah,
I think of the work of Audre Lorde. I think of the work of June Jordan. I think of folks who show up day to day for the practice and work of remaining resilient, to the second part of your question. And resilient is really, for me at least anyway, staying strong amidst the turmoil of what we might be facing, especially in black and brown bodies, especially in marginalized bodies. It is not only black and brown folks and marginalized people who can resist, but the idea of resilience, right, especially is paramount to all of our struggles on the day to day. And so especially now, I think, to even speaking to the onset of this conversation, how you kick things off right so wonderfully, this notion and idea of the times you're currently in and what is being asked of us, each of us as people, as human beings. It requires a level of resilience, and it also requires us to be to have our work deeply steeped in the art of resistance. I recommend Robin D.G. Kelly's Freedom Dreams, The Radical Black Imagination, as a really great template, especially for artists and creatives who are looking for ways to spark the imagination and using that imagination in order to find some level of radical thought and thinking and resilient and resistance practices centering social justice and using our creativity in order to do that. But that for me is what comes up first and foremost.
yeah. And I didn't expect to have so many emotions when I was listening to your book. I don't know. It took me places. I think I said to you do a voice memo on Instagram.
Yeah,
It took me to places
yeah,
I didn't know. I saw my brother. I saw myself. I
yeah,
saw, I grew up in the inner city
yeah,
in North Jersey, Patterson. For those who know,
yeah.
the home of Fetty Wap and Victor Cruz
Word, word.
and Mark Travis Rivera. Even though I'm not anyone like that, their level, but this idea around there was just one body of water, right, separating you and I,
Yeah,
at many times in our lives, and I heard your story. I heard the stories of my cousins. I thought of my brother,
yeah,
Kamal,
yeah,
who was gunned down in Buffalo, New York at 22.
yeah,
I saw my mother. I saw my sister. I
yeah,
saw the
yeah,
black and brown women and men and kids in my neighborhoods just trying to get by.
yeah,
And in your book, again, Everything and Nothing at Once, it had me feeling so many different emotions as a brown man, as a queer man, as someone who grew up in inner city, as I mentioned, as someone who has struggled with his body weight and his image.
yeah.
That to me was probably the most perplexed part of what I've read so far because I was just like, because I think sometimes people have this perception of people, right? Like they
Mhm,
look at who you
mhm.
are, they see the chiseled face, they see the facial hair, they see, the swag, and they can't even imagine that beneath that, right? Beneath the public persona, beneath the Instagram posts and the photos and the smoltery, looking photos and the laugh and the contagious laugh and the smile, that there is a man and a young boy deep within that still struggle with body image.
Absolutely, absolutely, and and thank you, Mark, for taking time to invest in the work. The book itself was absolutely a labor of love, and I think, to your point, I'd be remiss to not shout out Kiese Layman, whose book Heavy really inspired that essay that you're speaking to specifically,
Mm,
Belly, because it was the first time I had read a black man, a straight black man who identifies as such, really be that candid and open and honest, and it helped me really start exploring my own body narrative that I had already been exploring, but I never put on paper. And
Yeah.
so the book was an opportunity for me to do that. And so like each essay is really just me trying to unravel a bit of myself, for the hopes that, whether it's a young Joel or a young Mark can like see themselves in that unraveling and
Mm.
recognize the work required to do so, and also to the softness and grace required in order to hold space for that as well. Because
You
that's
gotta be the first black straight man's writing that I ever read about body image.
yeah, that's beautiful to
And
hear.
I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
because like I've said this in conversation, like community and public settings. I was, and I think I might have mentioned it in the essay. I be forgetting stuff, but there was this period of time, like prior to like writing the essay, Will Smith had made this really bold declaration on social media, like, "Oh, I'm just gonna show you my body. This is how I look in real life," and then it wound up just being it like essentially an advertisement for a show that he was promoting, and that
Mm.
was so disappointing to me because it felt like a real opportunity for someone to just be vulnerable without there needing to be some level of cultural cachet attached. Anytime I see a black body, a black male, straight male body being centered, and honestly, even a queer black body, it's normally a beautiful one. But especially if we're talking about a straight black or brown body, we don't really see fat black men on the covers of anything really. And so
Outside of the occasional athletic Sports Illustrated.
yeah, absolutely. And like you have to be, and to that point, Mark, you have to be athletic. You
Yeah.
know what I'm saying? Like I don't know if that's ever a point of conversation. I think there's a lack of understanding of the range of black masculinity and just the
Mhm.
body types and like what we celebrate and what we don't celebrate. And so part of the work for me was really getting to a place where I could feel like I could honor that in myself, and hopefully that would resonate for others as well.
Yeah, this leads to my question here, which is the third question I asked. Is ties back to masculinity. Many folks right now in the media in our landscape are discussing this idea or this belief that we are failing boys and young men in our country, as a
Yeah.
country, that we are failing them because in our attempt to course correct or repair the harm done to women in this country, some felt that we went too far on the pendulum swing in abandoning young men. And when we look at the statistics, when we think about the fact that men are X number of times more likely to commit suicide or have substance abuse, X number of times not to attain a certain level of education in comparison to women. When I think about the young men in my life, the men of color in my life, in my family, and the disdain I saw that they had for women, it's hard. It's hard to reconcile that, right?
And I think to your point, I couldn't agree more, Mark. I think we don't deal well with nuance at
Mm,
all. I think social media has exacerbated the issue tremendously. And so, to your point, we have. I think we absolutely have gone to the opposite end of the curve. And so it's like it's either black or right, it's right or wrong. We have to center, I mean, if we're being honest, we have to center queer, black women voices primarily. And there's a reason for that. And that reasoning makes sense in theory. What tends to happen, however, is folks who don't fall within that, and like it's such there's a tension in that because
mhm.
there's very much privilege. Like there's a privilege I have that many do not, right? Like outside of me just being a man, I'm a lighter skinned man, so like again, there are spaces and opportunities that I have because of that. I
Right.
will say, like, especially when we're talking about the publishing world specifically, my voice is not often heard, and
No,
you know
not in the way that you write too. Like it was, there was a level of authenticity, a layer of nuance and analysis. Not to get too academic
no
here, my
no
analysis here, but there was a level of authenticity and a level of rawness that you just don't hear from a lot of black authors, queer or straight, and especially when you're asking us to combat our homophobia, you're asking us to combat our sexism and our our need to over hyper masculine, to be hyper masculine, our need to chalk each other up by our sizes and who can beat up who. And I think about, I'm right now I'm in that chapter about Will Smith and the slap heard
Mhm.
around the world,
Yeah, yeah,
and I
yeah.
thought it was so interesting when we talked about how in our communities that would have just been another day.
Absolutely.
But the fact that it was a mixed company and the fact that it was on in the public stage, I think
Mhm.
exacerbated it and made it louder.
Yeah.
But what do you think we need to do to foster healthier masculinity for men in today's society, given the current social and political climate? Because I think that so much was happening in the political voting bloc
Hmm.
is because men feel left behind.
Yeah, and and I want to be clear too, Mark. Like, I don't want to make an excuse for the lack of, like, even if we're looking at the voting block, the large percentage of folks who voted for Trump were still white men and white women, right?
Hmm.
Right, and so that's part of it. I think you were kind of teetering on a thing that I think speaks to, for me, what has always been the priority, which is everyone's humanity,
Yeah,
right? And so, like, even and again, they thank you for some of the recollections of the book. Like, part of the work is, yes, I want to tackle the ways homophobia was translated in real world environments for me,
yeah.
or transphobia, and or misogyny, misogynoir. And really, what we're talking about is just treating human beings with respect. It's not hard.
It boils down to that respect.
Yeah, and but we see people on their we see we are steeped in seeing people based on their identities, right? And so that lacks a layer of nuance. You can see Joel as a straight black man, and then perceptions come up. We all have biases, and so part of the work for me for even writing the book was challenging those. Is challenging the binaries, right? And, like, I think so much of that practice, to be fair and to be honest, I also learned from the queer community. And so it's always troubling for me to see us call out the privilege, hold people accountable, but not leave room for the grace required in order for accountability to exist.
Yeah.
Because I can't hold you accountable without recognizing the history that predates the environment that that person is showing up in, right? So
Mm.
I can have issues with a person, a black man, or whatever the case might be, but I have to be cognizant of the environment that created that person. And
Yeah.
that's the same deals for, I mean, honestly, and that makes people uncomfortable, but it's the same rationale for a white person who's voted for Trump. It's the same rationale for the racist that lives in your neighborhood, the rapist that lives in your neighborhood. And this is when we start getting into abolition and what that really looks like.
Right.
How hard it is for us to let go of our preconditioned ideas and biases about people without recognizing the totality of a person's existence that's showing up in the room when we're navigating
Absolutely.
conversations with them.
And I think that's why I love your book so much because it really does give me a perspective that I have known, right? Because I have straight men in my family who
Yeah.
are black and brown, who love hip hop, who grew up inner cities, right? And I remember one of the last conversations I had with my brother, it was the last time I saw him in person before he was
Mhm.
murdered. And I was, at the time, I was about to graduate eighth grade. So I was just going through my eighth grade year of middle school, about to graduate. And he had just had my nephew, who was a year old at the time of his murder. And I said to him, I said, if you do not get out of this lifestyle will end your life. That was me speaking as a seventh grader going into eighth grade because I know what the hood can do to us, right? I remember, and this is also the same brother, the half brother on my father's side, who knew I was different
Mhm.
and was super protective of me.
Yeah.
He was a big brother. He knew I was queer even before I knew I was queer, and he
Mhm.
loved me anyways, and
Yeah.
he protected me from some of the relatives who were talking crap about me behind my back. And I remember my our father, who I don't talk to, is was and is an abusive man.
Mhm.
And the last summer I ever went to spend with him in Buffalo, New York, he had hit my stepmom. And so, me being who I am, even at a younger age, I was like, I know that's wrong. I'm calling the cops on you, right? Because one, I'm not an abolitionist back then. I'm still not an abolitionist, but I knew that something he had to be held accountable, right?
Yeah.
And I remember my brother, who Kamal, was like, "You should just mind your business."
Mhm.
And I was like, "I can't. How can you? How can you know that he's doing this and be okay with it?"
Yeah.
And I think about how many times people like my brother, people like myself, enable the behavior simply by saying nothing.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
Even though we weren't engaging directly in the harm,
Mhm.
we were complicit in it in our silence.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so when I think about what does it mean to foster healthy masculinity, I think for me it's like also asserting my masculinity and
Mhm.
its femininity, right?
Yeah.
Because I think people look at me and they have a hard time understanding that I'm a man, but then they see how I show up in space and like, oh, that's not a woman, or that's a very pretty boy, because I'm very much a dom, I'm very much an
Yeah.
alpha, right? And people can't reconcile how dare he call himself a man, but look the way he looks.
Yeah. Yeah, and that to me speaks to our lack of ability to recognize the complexities of our humanity.
Yeah.
And so even when you're talking about your brother, it's this notion that we fall into of like we judge books by their cover. And I think I'll take it a step further. I think that's normal. I think the goal for us, and indeed at least for me, is like you can make the assessment of the cover, and then you got to also, not to be corny, but you also got to open the book too. Like
Yeah.
if you're investing enough time to seek out the thing, then you also need to be willing to investigate and be curious about the internal workings of it.
Yeah.
And so for me, in order to do that, especially when we're talking about black masculinity, is so much of that is like we have to treat people as individuals, and that takes more time.
Yeah.
I think we live in a world, in a hyper digital world, a world that is moving at the speed of light. Like we can't really keep up with the technology, with the newness of it
Mhm.
all, and so it makes it really hard to actually slow down enough to say, "Oh, hi, Mark. I'm Joel. Who are you? What do you do?" A lot
Mhm.
of it is transactional, and so much of that is because we don't feel like we have time to
Yeah.
like actually get to know people. But that is actually the work of liberation. Because if I
Yeah.
know myself, I also get to know my neighbor. I also get
Mhm.
to limit the preconceived notions I might have about said person, especially if we're looking at this through the lens of like black masculinity and black men we encounter. Holding space for a person to be more than the thing that we see in front of them is crucial.
Absolutely. And I say this all the time. I think the biggest problem we're dealing with as a society right now is that we've stopped talking to each other.
Yeah, for sure.
Like, we look at each other and we automatically say, "Well, that's someone I can talk to. That's someone I shouldn't talk to. I can't agree with that." And to me, the most dangerous person in America is not the white, non-educated, low-income, rural white man who's non-disabled and hetero in the middle of nowhere America.
Yeah,
The most dangerous person to me are one, the white woman, the white so-called progressive
yeah,
democratic woman who's educated, who knows better, but still doesn't do better if it means she has to jeopardize or lessen her power, her
yeah,
privilege,
yeah. Fact.
right?
Yeah,
And so before it's about race or colorism or queerness or transness, it's about class.
yeah.
And I think that we are in a predicament right now where so many men, regardless of race, feel disempowered,
Mm-hmm.
right? They're not earning enough, right? They're not attaining levels of education compared to other groups, and yet they still have to deal with the same societal pressures of what it means to be a man,
Yeah, yeah,
and yet they don't have the same access and capital
yeah.
to live up to that standard.
Yeah. And I think you call out something important too, and I think it's important for the audience to understand because I think people sometimes conflate when a person is suggesting that class plays a way bigger role than is often communicated in these conversations, that it
Mm,
diminishes the role racism has in that. You can't have classism without racism. You can't
yeah,
have racism without classism. And also, I don't think we're reckoning with how important classism is with regards to how people are seeing each other. It's the argument I make all the time with Trump. Trump
yeah,
is a racist by default. I think Trump would have been whatever you needed him to be in order to promote an agenda that centered power dynamics as the most important part of his campaign. And he
yeah,
was leaning on those stereotypes that and those tropes that people were afraid of in order to garner like votes from the base. So
yeah,
that is like he's playing the long game with that
right.
in that
But
regard.
he's doing, to me, in my mind, he's doing the same thing that the slave masters have always done,
Absolutely.
right? Pitting marginalized communities against themselves to
Hmm.
keep the order, the
Yeah.
hierarchy.
Yeah. Yeah, you look at, and then we could look at some of our deceased martyrs from Chairman Fred Hampton to Malcolm X to MLK, right? Folks who towards the end of their lives, whether they knew it or not, had started to translate the role of classism in a deeper, more embedded way in everything that they were speaking to. I think Fred
Yeah,
Hampton had been doing that from the onset, but
right.
you look at even his work with the Weathermen, and very much looking at poor white rural individuals as a part of the struggle because he could recognize very clearly that the struggle was similar. The
Oh
race
yeah,
was an incredibly important part of it, but the classism aspect of it, like to your point, men, and again, not making excuses for men, but I don't think
no,
it's fair for us to hold people accountable without recognizing there was a world that men were asked to show up in. That world no longer exists. And if
no,
you don't have that world or the access to the language and the tools required in order to show up in a different, newer way, you will be lost. You will be confounded. You'll be confused. And someone like a Joe Rogan will fill that gap for you. Because
yes,
it's like, oh, you're hurting. You're sad.
Yeah, this
Here's
is
the reason why. You
yeah.
know.
Well, even think about what happened with the revolutionariness of technology and how that changed our labor force and how
Hmm.
suddenly we had manufacturing companies shutting down and factories closing and these blue collar folks were like, well, I don't know how to do anything else but this.
Hmm.
And then they're expected to compete in a global world connected and driven by technology and yet don't have the skills or the insight of how to do that.
Yeah, yeah. I think
Right?
some of the to that point, even to jumping on that, you end the ending of vocational schools, the ending of
Yeah.
trade schools, right? Like when I was working in the nonprofit sector, they were like folks would come home from Rikers and they'd be looking for like, yo, I'm looking for a trade program. I'm looking for a program that's going to help me get some sort of like viable living day to day skills. I don't want to be a podcaster or an entertainer. Like, yo, can I get a job as a plumber? Can I
Yeah.
get like those
An honest living that paid well, that was unionized for the most part.
Yep.
And I think, and this is hard, right? Because so much of my own pain have been at the hands of men.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so much of the pain that I've caused has been because of my manhood,
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
right? That there is no separating
Yeah.
the villain from the victim.
Yeah.
And you alluded to this a little bit that the world is changing so much. And how is it for you
Mm.
now that you're still living in New York, but you're in Brooklyn, to be fair? And it's okay. We love Brooklyn here, especially Best Stuy.
Yeah.
What does it feel like now as a man in your the decade, in the body that you're in now, living in New York City and raising a daughter there, West, right?
Yeah. And keep in mind too, Mark, I'm raising two girls. So I'm raising Lila, my 9-year-old, and West,
Yeah.
my 5-year-old.
Is
And
she back from Texas? So I can't remember if she's
you
back.
know what? So I mean, good memory. So Lila's back here in New York. So
Oh, nice. Okay.
yeah. So like, she's in fourth grade now. She's been here since second
Wow.
grade, fortunately.
Wow.
And West is now in pre-K. So
Ooh, time flies.
she'll be going to kindergarten, and then Lila will be in fifth grade this year. And I got to keep it honest, Mark. It feels pretty good. I have the same. I have the same struggles of like the day to day stuff. You know, um, Worries about money and like my girl's safety and the world. Primarily, a lot of my worries about the world. A lot of my worries about Palestine and Haiti and Sudan and the Congo and DR and I mean Puerto Rico, Hawaii,
Yeah.
Guam, right? The Bronx. Uh,
Mm.
you know what I'm saying? And also, there's just been so much joy. Like I'm 42 now, so
I
I'm
didn't
able.
want to put your age out there, so I was I'm glad you did. I was like, what?
But it's important, Mark. It's important because I think with the age and experience, there's also come a grounding, and that doesn't happen all the time, unfortunately
Oh,
for us.
yeah. I just turned 34, and I say the year I outlived my brother was the moment I realized that every year I get to celebrate another year is a
And
blessing.
that's in the grief that comes with that. Like I know there's so many folks who didn't get to see this age. I mean, I think about Chadwick Boseman.
Mm.
And you know what I'm saying? Like we're seeing black men die at an alarming rate way too early than I think, like far below what normally would be the life expectancy that has continued to increase.
Even Nipsey, you talk about that in your book. You talk
Yeah.
about
I,
Nipsey and his all and through the good and the bad, he was trying to get back to this community, and he didn't get to make it to your age.
it was important for me to talk about Nipsey because again, when we talk about the complexities of the human, a person who had used homophobic language in the past. I mean, well, his present at that time,
Yeah.
and I think there is something interesting about allowing people to grow. I don't think Tyra Banks is the best example, but I think about yeah, it's yeah, with me here, but I
I'm sorry. You caught me off guard with that one.
don't feel, but it's because when I think Mark, when I think about like we were all watching, at least most of us watching a Tyra show, and I
I
know
mean, that's how I learned how to pose. I mean, I don't take these fierce pictures by my.
but that's the thing. It's not like people were watching and going, "Oh my god, I can't believe how misogynistic the show is. And like I didn't have the language. There wasn't we weren't having the
Back then, it
intellectual.
was also a different time, and I think that's what's
Exactly.
happening is that we live in a time right now where everyone is cancelable, where cancel culture
Yeah.
is not is in lieu of accountability. Because I think accountability does need to happen, but we are no longer allowing for accountability. We want cancel, and we have now allowed us to get into this mentality, these factions of us versus them, and when we cancel someone, what we're really saying is you are disposable.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we void them of their humanity, of the ability to have grace. And my goodness, we
Hmm.
have all made mistakes. And if we are not given the ability to redeem ourselves, right?
Yeah.
If I can't say I know my Redeemer lives, then we're in huge trouble.
And Mark, this is why abolition to me is the way, and
Mm,
shout out to folks like Zola Ellen, who's kind of modeled that, Cherrell Brown, who kind of not modeled that practice for me. But the idea that everyone is redeemable, even the people we don't like. And I think we also get to make the distinction between someone who's made a mistake and someone who's caused considerable harm. I think we've taken a lot of this language and it's become buzzwords, and we haven't
mm-hmm.
really sat with the meaning. So like people say you harmed me, and it's like they
Okay.
said something you didn't like, as
Yeah. Or
opposed
you
to
triggered me. Okay, well, is it my job to constantly have to filter my statements based on what's going to trigger you?
and
Because
that's hard because that requires a level of discernment, and
yeah,
that discernment also requires a level of intentionality and trust of self.
yeah,
And going back to what we've talked about originally, like you have to do that work. If that work is not happening in those interpersonal dynamics,
mhm,
there's no way it's going to happen on a larger scale when we start talking about colonization, oppressing oppressors, and like how that language and how those individuals and those systems continue to like defeat us. We can't
yeah,
dismantle those things until we dismantle the oppressor in us. And like
yeah.
the abolition has been a way to do that.
Absolutely. And to be fair, when I say I'm not an abolitionist, I think I believe in reform and I think things have to be reimagined. It's just hard for me sometimes to say or jump on the abolitionist because often what I'm hearing people say is burn the system to the ground, but what I don't often hear is people saying, well, what do we rise what rises from the ashes?
And
What
that's
rises from the
Mark,
debris?
and you bring up an excellent point because that's the problem. I think not you per se, but like because you're
Mm,
absolutely right. I think, and I've heard somebody say this, and it was really helpful for me to help frame it for other people. Abolition, we have to think about abolition as preventative care. So
right.
often we're like, yo, get rid of the police, and then people, the question normally will have is, well, what are you going to do if someone gets raped? What are you going to do if someone gets murdered? And you're using abolition in the after case, as opposed to the preventative measures required in order for folks to know who their community members are, to
Mm,
understand their community and their community demographics, and work within our systems in our neighborhoods in order to, because like if someone gets murdered on your block, you should know about it, and not just know because it showed up on, I don't know, whenever those apps are that allow us to like spy and
yeah.
monitor our neighbors.
Neighborhood crime, yeah.
Yeah, but because I know who my neighbors are, I know who young Jonathan is, I know who these people are, I see them, I communicate with them, then that requires a level of trust that we're just not at yet,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
And I think, I mean, and I said this in past episodes, and I'll say it till my face turns blue and I roll over and die. We have adopted this individuality
Yeah,
complex, which is to me a symptom of white supremacy. And I think that the only way we're going to endure the next several years is if we do it together.
yeah,
If black and brown folks, if poor folks, if queer folks and trans folks and disabled folks and straight folks who and it's not even about allyship. Fuck allyship. You don't have to even think that I should have the right to get married. We
hmm,
don't have to agree on everything.
yeah, yeah,
That's where people we've lost that ability to disagree, right?
mm,
I can disagree with you on the best way to be an abolitionist. I can disagree with you about how to reform the criminal justice system. I can disagree with you about defunding the police. I can disagree with you on marriage equality and why disabled queer folks still can't get married, right? And why disabled people in general in America still don't have marriage equality because that's not a thing yet in this country, right? So I can talk about all these different things, but what I don't have to do in the process of disagreeing with you is void you of your humanity.
yeah. And I love you saying that because someone who comes to mind, the wonderful Dr. Jenn Jackson. I
Mm,
sent Dr. Jenn a voice note the other day because there was some like, there was like a kerfuffle that happened on Threads, that and I interjected because it felt like folks were kind of dogpiling on them a little bit. And when I told Dr. Jenn in the voice note was like, to be honest, there are things that you'll say that I disagree with.
Yeah.
Same way, I'm sure there are things that I say that they might disagree with, but what we don't disagree on are our value systems, and
Yeah.
I still love them and care for them, and that doesn't change, doesn't have to change. Now, granted, I think we get to keep like, yo, if you think everyone from the LGBTQIA community deserves to die, that's right. Like,
Right. There's layers to this. There's nuance.
exactly, we
But
don't.
what's happening is people are conflating minor infractions to those major infractions, and so what's happening is you're getting my pronouns wrong. How dare you? I feel misgendered, and
Yeah,
yes, that is painful, and yes, that can cause problems. But if someone did it one time and it was a mistake, and they acknowledge it and apologize, and you're dragging them through the coals. That is not how you build community. That is not how you build coalitions. In fact, that is how you continue to cause damage and rifts in the communities because now people are saying nothing because they're afraid of saying the wrong thing rather than giving people grace.
and to that point, Mark, and I love you saying that, and so part of that is that the pushback from that statement for some people I could imagine would be, well, it's not my job to coach or coax a person into the space. Like, if you've created a space that feels unsafe for me, then that's on you. My and because I'm aligned with you on this, I think what I see in that though is a lack of understanding of our relationship, because I think
Yeah.
it goes back to you talking about us seeing ourselves as individuals. If
Mhm.
I'm in a relationship with Mark, there's a way that I'm going to show up for Mark. I don't know, there's a somebody said this and I wish I could remember because I'm going to butcher it, but they were talking about the idea of knowing a person. And
Mm.
if you know a person, which would it just means that you have a deeper understanding of their heart and motivations, right? And so I can hold space for that because I am imperfect. To act as if I haven't said the thing, sent the thing, regretted doing the thing, wish I could take the thing back, then I'm no better than anybody else in that regard. And I think we
We
have to
talk about that a lot in the book too around the idea of cheating and being a cheater.
yeah, man, like come on, bro. Like
Yeah.
listen, I was just doing all types of fuck shit,
Yeah.
and shit that was not in alignment with the relationship, right? Because you can agree to a whole bunch of different shit in your relationship, and that,
Right.
but like that's not stuff that she agreed to. But so much of that is our lack of ability to recognize the humanity in each other, and also recognizing that we're all in relationship with each other. I'm in
Mhm.
relationship with you, and
Yeah.
so because of that, there's growth, there's learning, there's understanding.
There's grace, there's patience, right? It's just nuance, and I know we're out of time, and I want to honor your time, but
Yeah,
I have to say, what do you hope to shift in society through your work? Because I already see you doing the shift through
yeah.
your work, but what
I
do you
mean,
hope to shift in society through your work?
whilst a really dear friend of mine, Tiana, she goes by Child of Nines on Instagram. She called out something I had been putting out into the world. Like I wanted to be doing more community work, like specifically activations with the like in the public sphere, and specifically with men. I wasn't really getting called to the table for these conversations in a way that I'm like in these past couple of months I've been, and like that's been bringing me so much joy, because I do recognize there's a perspective that I have that I want to share with men, all men, but especially black men. And so I've been leading these bi-monthly writing wellness workshops with men. I'm leading the second one this Wednesday. I'm going to be out in LA for a fatherhood panel for the Waymakers Men's Festival, part of the BETX experience in June. And shout out to brother Louis Carr for the invite. That's the stuff. That's to me where the magic is. Because if I
Mhm.
can get and really quickly, so the first session I was leading for this writing and wellness workshop, I lead the men through a series of prompts. They respond to the prompts by writing to them. They share. Some of them decide to share out loud, and then like it's me there helping to guide and sift through that and like ground us in the conversation. And one of the first prompts I asked during the first session was like, "What does it mean to you to feel safe?" And the first three responses were like, "No one has ever asked me that question."
Mm.
And to me, that's the work. Like, oh, okay. When that happened, I was like, okay, I'm tapping into something here. There's like there's a closeness and proximity to language that men are not afforded because no one is talking to them about it.
Yeah.
Women, the first thing they get safety is the first thing. One of the first things, like make sure you're safe. Make sure you like
Mhm.
when men are taught to
Call me
create.
when you get home, share your location,
Yeah, all
Mhm.
that. Like
Yeah.
we're taught to make spaces safe, which we should, but we're
Yeah.
not taught how to be safe for ourselves first. And so
Yeah.
that's the work. If I can get you there, then I can get you also to a conversation about the mayoral elections in New York. Then
Yeah.
I can get you to a conversation about Palestine because now you're not just a safe space for yourself. Now you can also help create safe spaces in your neighborhood, in your community, in the politics, in the rooms that you get to enter. You know,
Absolutely.
it's through.
Joel, absolutely. Everything and all at once, right? Like it's everywhere and everything. I want to thank you so much for being a possibility model. Thank you for being a prolific
Thank you.
storyteller. Thank you for your grace. Thank you for this engaging conversation. You know, I always enjoy conversation with you, but I've grown a lot since that first podcast interview in 2020, 2021.
I
So
see you. Believe. Listen, man. Listen. You got the doc. You got the point. Like I see you. I see
yeah,
you.
so
All
I'm
right.
working hard, and I have to say there is something to be said about recognizing our shared humanity, and I think it's through storytelling that we can get back there.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Because I saw so much of me and my family in your story,
Thank
right? And sometimes stories can be a window or a mirror,
you. Yeah.
right? And
There you
so,
go. Yeah.
how will we harness the power of our story
Yeah.
to create a more inclusive world,
Yeah.
right? That's why
Hopefully.
that's the mission statement.
No, that's not. That's beautiful. I mean,
Yeah,
hopefully the stories do both.
yeah,
They're windows and mirrors. I love that.
absolutely. I mean, that's essentially right because there are parts of your story that I'm never gonna know. I mean,
Yeah.
well, I talked about this publicly already. I sleep with girls sometimes, right?
Yeah.
And my friends are like, "Wait, I thought you were queer." Yeah, well, my queerness has just got really queer, right? So
Yeah.
for some people, like my one friend, I love him. I can't even, he's gonna kill me for saying this, but we're doing my photo shoot, and he's like, I did something. I was like dressed boyish or whatever, trying to like do this composite theme. He had like one like feminine version of me and then one more masculine version of me because I like duality. And
Yeah.
he's like, and I said something, and he was like, well, only one of us. He was like, you will F more women than I ever will. And I was like, you right.
Valid.
So nuance. There's so much nuance, and so please be sure to check out his book, his
Yeah.
Gotham, um, awarded, right, or is it nominated?
Not nominated. Hopefully awarded, but
Yes, hopefully awarded. Be sure to check out Joel's work, support his work. All that will be in the show notes. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share this conversation with the men in your lives and other folks in your communities because this is project is a labor of love. And because my business is growing so much, I had to actually bring on a podcast producer and a consultant to help me with my work. So we're reaching a different level here, and I've never operated at this level, but I know I've operated with the best of intentions, and I'm so thankful to exist in your orbit. Thank you so much, Joelle.
Mark, I appreciate you. Likewise.
Be
Likewise.
well.